Hello, everyone. My name is Jamie Bailey, and I'm a senior attorney at McEntee Law Group. But today, I will be your host for Immigration Revelation, which is going to be our monthly casual conversation about all of the things that are coming up in the news about immigration. Well, the high points, we can't cover it all because it seems like everything in the news today has to do with immigration, but the important things that you generally need to know and be aware of going forward. So, before we get into it, though, I do need to let you know that while I am a licensed attorney and I solely practice immigration law, anything I talk about today should not be construed as legal advice. Now, if you do want legal advice about your particular situation, whether it's based on something that we talk about today in the news, or if you have your own questions about something completely unrelated to the topics that we're covering today, please feel free to reach out to the team. It will be at info@mcenteelaw.com, and we will be able to get you sorted with somebody to talk about your particular circumstances, and we would be happy to do it. But today, again, it's just a general overview of some news topics that have come up that directly impact the immigration world. I know that you will probably not be surprised by this, but unfortunately, a lot of the news these days, it's bleak. It's bleak in terms of immigration. So this will not necessarily be an uplifting chat, but certainly we can look for the light where we can find it. But the first thing I wanted to talk to you is something that's been evolving over the course of the year. And that is the current adjudication holds on petitions and applications pending before USCIS. And to get there, let's talk a little bit about what happened in the summer. So you might remember in the summer something called the travel ban. President Trump issued one of his many proclamations, and in that one in particular, he laid out a group of 19 countries that were part of a travel ban. They were deemed to be countries of concern, and in that it was restricting the mobility of individuals from those countries from coming into the United States. Thus the term a travel ban, right? So that is not great in and of itself, correct? So that was very problematic. But as the months go on and the environment is what the environment is, in December, USCIS, which is the agency that adjudicates immigration benefits, so petitions, applications, anything they're trying to get an immigration benefit, that's what CIS handles. And CIS is the agency actually where I worked as an attorney for the vast majority of my career. But USCIS issued what's called an adjudications hold regarding those countries that were involved in that June presidential proclamation, let's call it the travel ban. And what is an adjudication hold? So an adjudication hold doesn't mean your case is going to be denied because you're from that country. What an adjudication hold is what it sounds like, a hold. Now, ostensibly, the reason that an agency would put, or this agency would be putting these cases from individuals from these countries on hold is to increase vetting. So further background checks. This could involve additional interviews, all of these things in the guise of safeguarding the American people, avoiding fraud, all of these things that they like to say that are the underpinnings for these sort of actions. So for an adjudications hold, it doesn't mean that your case is over. It just means there's not necessarily an end in sight. It's sort of sitting around waiting for the hold to be lifted, additional guidance, or in certain circumstances, there are carved out exceptions, and also in extremely unusual and exceptional circumstances, sometimes there could be a lift of a hold in a particular case. Where I would see that most likely would be in the case of a litigation matter. But that's a case-by-case basis, and I would say would be very, very, very limited. Now, that was the beginning of December, and we think, okay, these poor individuals from the 19 countries are subject to this travel ban, and then now this adjudication hold. But CIS did one better. On that adjudication hold at the beginning of December, that also included all asylum applications. So not just asylum applications for individuals that are on that list of 19 from the June travel ban presidential proclamation, across the board. And again, this is under the guise of, or the idea behind this is for additional vetting, background checks, making sure that there's not fraud or safety issues that are being missed by the processing of these asylum applications. So if you're an asylum applicant from one of these countries, from any country, you're in this boat. If you are an individual from that initial set of countries and not asylum, but you have another immigration benefit pending, then you're also caught up in a hole. Unfortunately, it did not stop there. It just keeps on coming. We would think that over the holidays we'd have a break, but that is not what happened. We got another presidential proclamation that expanded the list of the travel ban type countries, and it's an additional 20, I believe. And at first it's like, well, okay, back to square one. What happened to those countries in June when we had just the presidential proclamation and the travel ban? Okay, well, that impacted the travel of those individuals to the United States. There was a slight little gap of, will CIS add these to the adjudication hold? Is it clear? Because the first adjudication hold memo was tied to the original June presidential proclamation. So there's that little blip, but lo and behold, New Year's Day, January 1st, USCIS issues a clarifying memo that does put these new countries into that adjudications hold. So just to go over a little bit, I know the adjudications hold sounds scary, and there are things that you should and shouldn't do, right? So what you should not do is fail to respond to your RFEs. I know that there has been some talk, well, if the agency isn't going to adjudicate my petition because it's on the adjudications hold, why am I going to submit my RFE? Well, you want to meet your timelines, right? Generally, you're going to want to comply with any of your agency deadlines that you've been set, because you don't want to be in the position of a hold being lifted tomorrow. It could be lifted tomorrow. We don't know when the hold's going to be lifted. We don't have a crystal ball. And then you hadn't complied with your requirement to respond to a request for evidence or any other filing deadline that you're facing. So a don't during the adjudication hold time is to don't stop. You're still going to be continuing on doing what you need to be doing to keep your case going, just knowing that the agency on their side is not taking adjudication action on these cases when you're in this realm, in this universe of countries that are affected. And then, of course, asylum across the board. So, when I talk about immigration benefits, if it's not clear, I'm talking about green cards, I'm talking about naturalization, of course, asylum, general visas overall. So that really affects pretty much everybody who's in the immigration system right now, if you have something pending. But just because it's on hold doesn't mean it's going to be denied. And there are some limited circumstances that can sort of get around that. But again, they are very, very, very limited. And if you think you have an extreme situation that warrants maybe looking at pursuing something like that, even on the very, 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 very low chance that could even possibility, I would recommend talking to an immigration lawyer who's familiar with these situations that might be able to advise you whether or not that's even in the realm of possibilities. And then again, I mentioned there are some very small exceptions, including for certain international athletes. And so if you feel like you fall in any sort of exception or have specific concerns, the best thing for you to do would be reach out for counsel as soon as possible to get an idea of what you're looking at. Now, what I would suggest that you do is, and this is across the board, but especially now, if you identify if your country is on the list, and I believe that we'll be able to put through a link to show what countries are currently on the list, as it keeps on snowballing, getting bigger, right? And then you want to make sure your country's on the list, but then also you're going to want to stay on point, stay on top of monitoring your own case. And that's good practice anyway. it doesn't matter if you're on on the list or not. It's always good to keep an eye on where your case is standing with USCIS. So your case status online, et cetera. Just kind of keep an eye on how things are going. A lot of times there's a drag, seeing drags on getting receipt notices, et cetera. So it's always just a good idea to stay on top of USCIS's movement on your case, but especially if you're impacted by by the adjudications hold that we're seeing. Now, I would also say with this, if you fall into this travel ban plus USCIS adjudication hold universe, international travel is probably not your friend right now. So before you take any action, I would definitely suggest reaching out to an immigration attorney and talking about your particular case and finding out about the concerns that you're going to be looking at. Of course, there are emergencies, right? And people have to make hard calls, even under these really strict, unfavorable conditions. The reality is sometimes people have to make hard calls and travel. So it's just best to know what your outcome will be based on that travel. And then you make the call whether or not that is something that you're going to be able to live with, either way. So definitely reach out to counsel before you take any travel plans. And I think that is pretty much all for the adjudications hold, except for to say we never know when it's going to be lifted or added to. And in fact, this is actually a very timely time to be having this conversation. There's rumblings in the news that there are a vast increase of countries being included. So we will follow up through our blog and social media of any updates we have of any additional countries that are going to be included. And we're talking a large number of countries that could be potentially added to travel ban and or USCIS adjudication hold. So definitely follow along to see that very, very, very new change that's coming. So please pay attention, be aware, because if you weren't on the 19, then additional 20, a large number, I mean, your country that you might not ever have expected to end up on a list like this could be. So just please stay on top of it, watch the news, follow us for updates, just to see if you're going to be in that greater list that appears to be forthcoming. Now, the saddest thing, well, it's all sad, but one of the most horrendous things that we've seen in the news recently regarding immigration is the woman in Minnesota being shot and killed by an ICE agent on January 7th. So it is one of the most horrendous things. You've seen that, I'm sure, online, the videos of exactly what happened. But she was shot and killed in a residential neighborhood in Minneapolis. As you've seen in the news, there's been a huge push of immigration enforcement in the Minneapolis area. This individual, this woman, Renee Nicole Good, she was a wife and a mother, and she was in a vehicle when the agent shot at her at close range. So these are all things that you can see on the news. But this shooting, an incredible tragedy, has really kicked up more widespread outrage of these things that are happening, the immigration enforcement that has been happening across the country all these months. Something serious like this is renewing the fervor of people, their outrage, right? It's just public outrage. We've seen it in protest. We've seen it in state and local leaders that are questioning the tactics. We've seen federal prosecutors either resigning or planning to resign, and just a host of, during this immigration enforcement campaign, we're just seeing even more evidence of violations of rights. So it is a very, very dark time when we're seeing things like this. And at least at McEntee Law, we stand with those who are calling for clarity and due process and respect for the rights of all individuals impacted by this immigration enforcement campaign, both in Minnesota and across the country, that we've been living with and seeing people really suffer from for months on end. So that is just the latest tragedy that we've seen come across in the news, and it is hard to see, but it's happening, and it's something to be aware of. And what you can do is, one, stay informed and find trusted news sources that you can verify your own information, see videos, just really pay attention to what's going on. And if you do choose to protest, make sure that you're doing so in a safe way and know your rights before going. And in particular, if you are a non-citizen who is wanting and or planning on protesting, we do have a guide for your right to protesting as a non-immigrant, that a non-citizen, that I think that we can drop, that will help you know your rights if you choose to take that sort of action in this time of general outrage and sadness and grief that is really taking over this country. Now, it's hard to follow that with anything, and it's certainly not great news to completely overshadow that at all, but in a little glimmer of hope, we have a judge recently has blocked the Trump administration from revoking the immigration parole program. So last week, a federal judge temporarily, through a TRO, stopped the Trump administration from ending the family reunification parole, and that impacts 10,000-ish immigrants who would have lost their otherwise legal status. And what this really means is, yes, it's a win. Okay, we got it. Trump administration, you can't do this right now, but it was temporary. So because of that court order, this initial court order, doesn't mean the case is stopping. It's just an initial court order. It means that those immigrants that would have been in the immigrants in that bucket, those are able to stay in the United States and keep their legal permissions, work authorization if they have it for now. The judge found that the government didn't properly notify people before trying to take away the statuses, and that violation of due process. But this pause, because of the nature of a temporary restraining order, is about 2 weeks that we're seeing. So while this case continues to unfold in federal court, the outcome can absolutely still change, but we'll take a win where we can take a win, right? So even if it is on the smaller scale, it is something, right? And so that gives us a little bit of hope that there are things that can be done, and people are fighting. People are fighting for these things, and to help people who are being impacted by these policies, by this movement, by this increase in enforcement. So that is a glimmer of hope that we can hold on to, at least for now, and hopefully in upcoming days, whether through that case or in other cases that are pending across the United States on different issues involving immigration, that we'll continue to see some good news out of that. So fingers crossed, and definitely stay tuned. And if we do come across good news to share, we will certainly send it out to everyone. But for now, if you are one of the individuals, and again, it's roughly 10,000, so we're not talking about the largest population right now, but if you're an individual who falls under that family reunification parole umbrella, what you really need to do for now is stay put, keep your documents, avoid travel. That's just a theme today. We got to be careful about our international travel, and make sure if you're going to international travel, if you have any immigration concerns, talk to an immigration attorney first. And then also, just if you are in this bucket of individuals, talk to an immigration attorney to see what what comes next? What happens if if after the TRO is over and we're going forward with that federal court case and we get an unfavorable decision? What next? What's next for you? What are your options? So you would definitely want to go ahead and have that sort of percolating, some ideas, plan B, C, D, E, F, to try to have some stability if you can, through the best that we can in the environment that we're living in. So those were the main 3 news items I want to talk about today. And I know that they were not light. They were pretty heavy. And I know that the country is mourning the loss of life, and also a lot of the other violations that have occurred during this immigration enforcement crackdown. So I know it's a hard time. It's a hard time out there, but we're all bearing witness to it. So we will continue to look for good news and share that as that comes up. And like I said, this will be a monthly casual conversation about things that we're seeing in the news that we think you should be aware of, and things that you need to maybe take into consideration when you're dealing with your own immigration case. Now, I know that we have a little bit of time for questions, and I have a few that have come in, so I wanted to touch on those briefly, and then if we have time for additional ones, we can do that. So the number one question we're getting, and I think I might have already hit this a little bit in my talk, is should I travel internationally if my application is paused or pending? International travel right now is just complicated. It's complicated for individuals with status. It's complicated for people who are traveling on ESTA. It's complicated across the board because there's a lot of unprecedented things that we're seeing at the border, CBP inspections, all of that. So I would say if you have, in certain applications pending, you need permission to travel anyway. So for example, if you have a pending 485 and you have if you've asked for advance permission to travel, that's one thing. But again, actually traveling is another. So before you actually book your tickets and leave, make sure you talk to somebody first to see what are the pitfalls, that you could come across, because you don't want to make a situation worse if you could help it. And again, fully recognizing that there are emergencies in life that cannot be avoided, but it's best to know upfront what the risks are and what the outcomes are going to be to the best of our ability, so that you can make an informed decision about what you need to do. And then the other question that is coming up, because it is that time of year coming up on H-1B cap season, the question is, what is H-1B cap and when should I apply? So when people say cap, it's because the H-1B cap is the limit, like the number limit of new H-1B visas that they can give out each year. So that's 85,000. They're 65. They're regular. 65K. They're regular. 20K. They're U.S. masters. And then there are also individuals that are companies that are tax exempt, not tax exempt, that are cap exempt. So they don't need the lottery or the registration. So they're like universities, nonprofits. If you think you're one of those, definitely reach out and figure out if that is something that fits for you. But because there's such a huge need, so many people want H-1B visas, there's always more than available, right? So that is why we have the H-1B cap lottery when we have the registration, and the registrations exceed the cap, so the high number, then that's when the USCIS runs the lottery to decide who can file an H-1B. And I know there's been a lot of talk about this year. What's different? Because, we've heard the $100,000. We've heard a lot of things, actually. So just 2 changes for fiscal year 2027 that we're expecting. Replacing the randomized lottery with a wage-based system. That is a possibility, and that favors more of like a higher paid candidate situation. And then the $100,000, which is what caught the world by storm when that was announced, that may apply to candidates who were selected during registration that are not subject to the fee, but are not subject to the fee if you have valid status in the U.S. There are a lot of it's still a little bit up in the air, but there are a lot of nuances to that. So if you are looking at the H-1B as a possibility for you, or if you're a company looking at potentially looking to hire H-1B individuals, now is definitely a time to get started for assessing whether or not there's a valid H-1B case and what other concerns there might be, because registration comes up in March. So you want to have all your ducks in a row and know whether or not that's something that you're going to want to pursue before then. And then another question I see that is, I'm a green card holder, but I am concerned about traveling. What are some things I should keep in mind? Okay, so as a green card holder, entry's never guaranteed, right? You never know if somebody at the border is going to be a rogue CBP officer at the airport, etc. I mean, we're living in wild times, right? I do think that social media and what you post on social media, should that be reviewed in secondary, is something to consider. But just being prepared to have some additional review when you're coming back into the country, just a secondary, additional time, additional questions. So just be mindful and definitely mind your P's and Q's. Now, if you have any sort of criminal or other issue that has popped up before you travel, definitely make sure to get advice before taking any sort of leap like that, because any sort of major change can impact what happens when you're trying to get back into the country. So green card holder, yes, travel, but just be mindful that increased scrutiny. And then also, if you have intervening factors that have happened, definitely make sure those are taken into consideration when you're trying to decide if you're going to travel. So I might have time for a question or two. We're running close to the end, but I am not seeing any. So that being the case, these are just the big news items. There are many, many more. Please follow us. We are constantly updating via social media and on our blog that's at our website. And if you or someone you know have been affected by one of these recent policy updates, the travel ban, the adjudication hold, or if you have questions about immigration, your immigration case or potential immigration case in general, please reach out to us. Again, it's info@mcentlaw.com. And just as a heads up, in addition to these immigration revelation news, casual conversations, we have some other events coming up. Friday, January 23rd is a H-1B cap lottery registration 2026, what employers need to know. And that will be conducted by our outstanding attorney, Irene Lee. He was amazing at H-1Bs. And then also later this month, on Wednesday, January 28th, we have our attorney, Ryan, who's giving a talk on from enrollment to post-graduation U.S. immigration options for international students. So that will be very helpful for individuals who are here on F1s and looking at ways to continue in the United States after their time. So if seeing that there are no further questions, I thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us today. And hopefully in months to come, we will have more optimistic news stories to cover. But we're all in this together. We're all watching and hoping that things will turn around, and we all stand with the immigrant community and everything that is going on across the country right now. And we're here to help. Please reach out if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you.